When the war finally collapsed around them in the spring of 1945, Germany was not a country anymore. It was a landscape of ruins, smoke, ash, and quiet, starving faces, especially children whose ribs showed through thin shirts as they wandered bombed-out streets holding rusted tin cups, hoping for anything edible, for a crust of bread, for a potato, for something warm enough to remind them they were still alive. And when American troops marched into towns that had been ravaged by fire and famine, the civilians were convinced, because Goebbels had drilled it into them for 12 brutal years, that the Americans would loot, burn, punish, enslave, and humiliate them, that the enemy would treat Germans the way German propaganda boasted about treating others. But instead of rage, the first thing the Americans did was set up field kitchens, massive steel pots simmering with soup thick enough to smell from blocks away. And when the wind carried that scent through the ruins, beef, onions, carrots, beans, children followed it like ghosts waking from a nightmare, first hiding behind doorframes, staring with hollow eyes at the strange foreign soldiers ladling warm food into dented metal bowls, and the Americans, seeing the hesitation, waved them forward gently, offering spoons, bread, and blankets, and soon dozens of children walked toward the kitchen lines, trembling, dirty, terrified, but pulled by hunger they could no longer ignore. The first bold child, a boy perhaps 8 years old, held out a cup with both hands, expecting to be shouted at or struck, because that was the only life he had known. But the American cook simply smiled, filled the cup to the brim, then added a second ladle. "To make it fair," he said, not knowing the boy hadn't eaten a full meal in months. And as the boy tasted real food, warm, salty, rich, his eyes filled, and he ate so fast he nearly choked before the cook knelt, patted his back, and gave him a loaf of soft bread he could take home. And within minutes, the news spread through ruins and cellars like a spark through dry grass. The Americans are feeding the children. Mothers who had buried infants over a winter of starvation pulled their surviving kids toward the lines. Women whose husbands were dead or missing stood there silently crying as their children finally ate something that wasn't boiled weeds or potato peels, while American soldiers kept ladling and ladling and ladling, some swallowing hard at the sight of children licking bowls clean, others pretending not to notice their own eyes burning as they pulled rations meant for troops and handed them to small hands that shook with gratitude. In some towns, GIs brought out crates of Spam, powdered milk, Hershey bars, army biscuits, peanut butter, dehydrated eggs, the kind of food American children threw away in school cafeterias. Yet to German civilians, these were treasures more valuable than gold. And one sergeant wrote home that he had never understood the word angel until a German mother fell to her knees in front of him when he handed her 2 cans of condensed milk for her newborn, repeating, "Danke, danke, danke," until she collapsed into sobs. And soon, American regiments unofficially adopted entire neighborhoods, soldiers spending their own pay to buy bread from local farms, building makeshift bakeries, repairing wells, clearing rubble so soup kitchens could run longer hours, and children began waiting every morning at the gate for their Americans, bringing flowers, drawings, and shy smiles, calling them Schutzengel, guardian angels, a term that spread from village to village because even adults, once terrified of Allied uniforms, could not deny what they were seeing with their own eyes, that the enemy fed them when their own government had abandoned them, that the people they feared were the ones keeping their children alive. And as weeks turned into months, Germans watched something that broke them emotionally. Not soldiers humiliating conquered civilians, but young GIs washing lice out of children's hair, teaching them baseball with sticks and rocks, handing out candy bars during Easter, repairing torn shoes, and inviting starving families to eat leftover rations at American mess halls. And slowly, painfully, distrust softened into gratitude. then affection, then awe, because no one had expected mercy in a war that had taken everything. Yet mercy was exactly what arrived wearing dusty American boots. And decades later, those children, now old men and women, would still remember the taste of that first warm stew, the kindness of those first foreign faces, and would tell their grandchildren that in the darkest year of their lives, when hunger had nearly destroyed them, it was the Americans, these strangers once painted as monsters, who appeared like angels in a starving land and proved that even after the most brutal war in history, humanity could still rise from the ashes with a warm bowl of soup and a gentle hand extended toward a frightened child.
Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.